Welcome back, friends. Today you'll hear a story so rare, it happened only once in the entire Second World War. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Your support keeps these incredible forgotten stories alive. It all began with a British submarine sent into hostile waters at the very start of the war, her mission simple on paper but deadly in reality: to patrol, disrupt enemy shipping, and bring back intelligence. The crew knew the risks, but nothing could prepare them for what awaited. As the boat slipped silently beneath the waves, every man on board was aware that one mistake, one unlucky strike, could mean death in the deep. Hours into the patrol, disaster struck. An underwater mine detonated so close to the hull that the entire vessel shuddered violently. Lights flickered and died, men were thrown against the steel walls, and the submarine lost buoyancy, plunging downward. In seconds they hit the seabed with a sickening crash, trapped hundreds of feet below the surface. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the groans of twisting metal and the labored breathing of men already short of air. For nearly 24 hours the crew lay in darkness, rationing what little oxygen they had. Every minute felt like a lifetime, every creak of the hull a reminder that the sea was pressing in, eager to crush them. Some whispered prayers, others worked with trembling hands, fighting to restore systems, refusing to accept death. At last, against all odds, the engines coughed to life. Ballast tanks were blown, and with a roar of bubbles the submarine tore free from the seabed and clawed her way back toward the surface. When daylight finally pierced the hatches, it was nothing short of a miracle. The men, pale and exhausted, thought they had been given a second chance at life. But fate had one more test in store. As the battered submarine limped toward safety, her crew clung to the hope of reaching neutral waters where they could recover and repair. But the sea is never merciful for long. Before long, the sharp drone of engines filled the sky. German aircraft had spotted the wounded vessel, circling like vultures over prey. Sirens wailed, and the men rushed to their stations, knowing they had little left to fight with. Bombs rained down, geysers of water erupting around the hull as steel groaned from the shockwaves. The submarine, barely afloat after her ordeal on the seabed, shook under every blast. Machine gun fire peppered the deck, forcing sailors to duck for cover. Yet in that desperate hour, when survival seemed impossible, the crew did something extraordinary. Instead of surrendering to fate, they fought back. With broken weapons and limited power, they returned fire at the attacking planes, their defiance echoing across the sea. Some accounts even say the submarine managed to score hits, driving the enemy back long enough to slip into cloud and mist. For the men aboard, it was proof that their ship, wounded, scarred, and half dead, still had fight left in her. What happened that day became legend, a story whispered across the Navy, the submarine that survived a mine, the seabed, and the fury of the skies. It was said to be the only time in the entire war that such a miracle occurred, and it turned an ordinary patrol into one of the greatest tales of endurance and courage in naval history. Anchor. Word of the submarine's ordeal spread quickly through the fleet. Sailors who heard the story could hardly believe it, a vessel crushed to the seabed, entombed without air, only to rise again and defy the Luftwaffe's fury. To many it sounded less like a report and more like a myth, yet the weary faces of the survivors proved it was real. For the crew themselves, the memory never faded. They spoke of the choking staleness of the air, of men collapsing from exhaustion as they worked in the pitch dark to bring the engines back to life. They remembered the thunder of bombs slamming into the sea around them, the metallic shriek of bullets ricocheting off their hull, and the strange calm when the enemy finally broke off the attack. In naval archives, the event was recorded as a singular phenomenon, something that never happened again in the course of the entire war. Submarines were lost in their hundreds, to mines, to depth charges, to aircraft and escorts. But this one boat, against every law of chance, endured all three threats in a single mission and returned home. It was not victory in the traditional sense. No convoys were sunk, no enemy fleet destroyed. But for the men who lived through it, survival itself was triumph enough. Their story became a quiet legend, a reminder whispered among submariners that even in the darkest depths, when the sea seems ready to claim you and the sky rains fire, there is still hope, so long as courage does not falter. In the years after the war, the tale of that submarine became a point of pride for all who served beneath the waves. Submariners are a brotherhood, bound by the knowledge that every patrol could be their last, and this story reminded them that sometimes sheer determination can defy even the sea itself. Veterans told it in hushed tones, describing the faces of men lit only by flickering emergency lamps, the silence as they waited for oxygen to run out, and the surge of joy when the hull finally rose from the depths. For the families of the crew, the story carried even deeper meaning. Letters home spoke not of glory or victory, but of survival against all odds, of ordinary men refusing to yield to despair. Many of those families never knew how close their loved ones came to death until years later, when the full details were finally shared. Historians later marked the incident as a one-of-a-kind event in naval history. Never again would a submarine survive such a chain of disasters. Mind, trapped on the seabed, battered by bombs from the sky, and still return alive. It stood as a testament not to steel, but to spirit. And so the submarine's patrol passed into legend, a voyage that should have ended in silence on the ocean floor, but instead became a story of endurance, defiance, and the unbreakable will of those who refused to surrender to the deep. Some say that her survival was simply chance, a miracle of timing and fortune. Others insist it was skill, the product of a crew who refused to let death claim them. Perhaps it was both. But whatever the reason, the truth remains the same. Never again in the war did a submarine endure so much and still return. That is why her story endures. Because it is more than history, it is a legend written in darkness and fire, whispered by waves, and carried through time as proof that even in the deepest depths, the human spirit can rise. Even now, long after the guns of war have fallen silent, her name surfaces whenever sailors speak of resilience. The oceans may be vast and unforgiving, but her story reminds every crew that the sea does not always claim those it traps. Sometimes, against all reason, men can claw their way back from the brink. At memorials for lost submariners, when wreaths are lowered into the water, veterans often think of her. They remember how she returned scarred but alive, carrying with her not just her crew but the hope of countless families. In that moment, she became more than a submarine. She became proof that endurance itself can be a kind of victory. Historians still debate the details. How close she truly came to destruction, how many bombs rained down upon her, how her engines could possibly have been coaxed back to life. But for the men who were there, the answers do not matter. What matters is that they lived, and their survival became a light for others lost in the dark. And so, her legacy drifts beyond time. She is remembered not for the enemies she sank, but for the deaths she defied. A submarine that bore the weight of the sea, the fire of the skies, and the silence of the abyss, and still returned. A story eternal as the tide, told wherever men sail into danger. And with every tide that washes against the shore, it is as if her memory rises again. Sailors say that legends like hers are not bound to steel or wreckage but to the spirit of those who endured the impossible. She is not remembered for conquest, but for survival, a rare kind of glory that belongs to those who refuse to surrender even when surrounded by certain death. For storytellers, her patrol has become a canvas of extremes, light and darkness, despair and hope, silence and thunder. They describe the crushing stillness of the seabed, the frantic hammering of bombs above, and the defiance of men who turn their fear into strength. Every retelling breathes new life into the legend, ensuring that it will never be forgotten. For the men who once served beneath the waves, her story became personal inspiration. When storms raged and depth charges rattled their hulls, they reminded themselves, there was once a boat that endured even worse and came home. That thought alone gave them the courage to carry on. Thus, her place is eternal. Not in monuments of stone or iron, but in the living tradition of sailors, in the quiet prayers before a dive, in the whispered tales shared on calm nights at sea. She is the submarine that death could not claim, a story forever carried by the ocean's voice. And so her saga ends not with the sinking, but with survival. She returned from the seabed where no submarine should have risen, from skies filled with fire where no vessel should have endured. What began as just another patrol became a legend, the story of men who faced death 3 times and refused it each time. Today she rests not in the ocean's depths, but in memory, a monument to courage stronger than steel, a reminder that even in the darkest waters, the human spirit can rise unbroken.